there just seemed to be no joy last night. You want to be in a kind of positive and good, and I think the Republicans are right now stuck in this sort of negative populist orthodoxy. How everything is so bad, and I just didn't hear the kind of positive things. Now, look, I think they all had a better night. I think they all, sort of the nerves were gone. I think they improved. But at the same time, was it enough to overtake Donald Trump? I think, again, the Republican Party is sort of stuck in this negative populism. And I think over time, they're going to have to shed that. And it might be painful for them, but they think they're going to win with this. I don't think so.
Robert Gibbs, do they think they're going to win? Because it seemed as for a while, it just seemed as though they were scrapping with each other so much that, as I think John Kasich just pointed out, there was no uplifting, there was no vision, and it diminished all of them.
Yeah, Andrew, I mean, I think we were only missing Animal House, somebody yelling food fight to kind of complete the debate. They did seem to rush to get out to say what they weren't going to do, to say what was wrong, to the governor's point. Surprised that they weren't a little bit more forceful on sort of what they wanted to do. Obviously, the Reagan legacy is one of a positive vision, whether or not you agree with it. That shining city on a hill, which was clearly missing. Look, I think Ron DeSantis and Governor Haley had good nights for their campaigns. Whether or not that does much, quite frankly, to upset the math of where we were, I'd be pretty pessimistic on that. And I think the absolute and overall winner is probably Donald Trump, because he goes into last night and comes out still a commanding and strong frontrunner.
And Michael Gibbs, there was another highlight, was former Governor Nikki Haley going after Vivek Ramaswamy over his use of TikTok because of his past involvement as an investor in China. Let me play some of that.
I have a radical idea for the Republican Party. We need to win elections. And part of how we win elections is reaching the next generation of young Americans.
This is infuriating because TikTok is one of the most dangerous social media apps that we could have. And what you've got, I honestly, every time I hear you, I feel a little bit dumber for what you say.
Michael Steele?
That kind of summed it up for me, that about everybody on that stage. I think people across the country felt the same way. With all due respects to my friends and colleagues to my right and left here, last night was an absolute crap show. It was nonsense. There was nothing redeeming about it. They stood in the house of Ronald Reagan in his library and belittled his memory and his legacy, didn't talk about how the Republican Party under his leadership at that time defeated communism, defeated Russia, brought it to its knees. And you had people on that stage who actually embraced Vladimir Putin. So there was, for me, as a Republican, nothing worth really talking about, getting excited about. As an American, even less so. But what was more foreboding than anything else was the inability to not only carve out a direction for the country amongst those you're standing on stage with, but with the very important piece in front of you that was not there in Donald Trump. There was nothing that distinguished them against Trump and gave the Republican base a reason to move off of Trump onto them. So I think we're going to see more of this, Andrea. Nothing improves from this, in my view, as I'm just saying as someone who has worked with, trained with, and been part of presidential campaigns and candidates. This is a very difficult slog for the GOP right now, and they know it. They know it.
Well, another thing that was missing was, having covered all of the Reagan debates as well, Reagan's wit and his light touch, like, there you go again with Jimmy Carter, or what he did with Walter Mondale in that second debate, which he was not going to, exploit his opponent's youth and inexperience to deal with the questions about his own age because of how badly he had performed in the first debate. Governor Kasich, California's Governor Newsom went into the spin room and reacted afterwards with Rachel Maddow. I want to play a little bit of that. Get your response.
I thought it would be more of a vice presidential debate, but I wasn't even convinced that we saw the next vice presidential nominee for Donald Trump on the stage. So look, from Trump's perspective, tonight was great. There was no great breakout. There was feeble attempts to take shots at Trump for not showing up. I thought Biden, honestly, was the big winner tonight.
I don't know about that because Joe Biden was taking hits from every direction. But Governor Kasich, what was your reaction? I mean,
he's trying to run for, come on, he got sent there by Biden. If Biden doesn't run, he wants to run. And look, if Joe Biden were to say, okay, I'm not running again, we're going to watch the Democrats debate. You're going to see how much fun that is. I mean, these debates are not really the best way to pick a leader. I think it's one set of skills you need to get picked as a nominee. It's another set of skills to be picked to govern. So I think all the Biden people are just hoping that things can move forward and, he can be the nominee and nothing gets in the way. But Gavin Newsom, God bless him, he's out there to do a job. But, the real interesting question is, does Trump go to the next debate? Because as of right now, I think he doesn't want to be in a situation where for 2 hours people are pounding on him. I don't know what he'll decide, but I want to just reinforce one other sense. We talk about Reagan. I knew Ronald Reagan. I was in Congress when he was president. There was a sense of uplift and a sense of positive. But what Donald Trump has brought on the Republican Party is this negative populism. Everyone's against you. You're a victim. And right now, the people in the party, and they look at these polls and they see him competitive with Biden, I think they think that message kind of works. So if you have a different sort of a message, and I've thought about, imagine myself on that stage, a different kind of a message, a positive message, I'm not sure it sells with the party, with the base. So right now, it's really a quandary for the Republicans. Right now, they're going to bet on this. They're going to bet on this negative populism. But I think they're going to need to come out of it. And I would be imagining Ronald Reagan, if he was advising, he would say the same thing. Come out of this. Come out for what you're for. Paint a better picture. But it's difficult for these candidates right now.